The kitchen smelled of fresh toast and coffee, but my mind was already restless. I watched Eric tie his shoes, glancing at his phone with that little half smile before slipping it into his pocket like it was a secret. When I asked why he was leaving earlier, his answer came too quick, too polished. He said something about a student named Camilla, and the way her name rolled off his tongue felt rehearsed. My chest tightened. It wasn't just what he said. It was how he said it. He poured his coffee and leaned against the counter as if everything were perfectly normal, but I couldn't ignore the sharp edge in his voice. "Camilla, you never mentioned her before," I asked, keeping my tone light. He didn't meet my eyes. Instead, he brushed me off with a clipped, "It's new, stop overthinking." That dismissal stung more than I wanted to admit. The words stayed in the air, heavier than the steam rising from our mugs. I smiled back, but inside, a storm was building. When he finally left, the scent of his cologne lingered longer than his goodbye kiss. I stood in the quiet kitchen, staring at the door, feeling a knot tighten in my stomach. Who was Camilla, and why was she suddenly part of our mornings? I kept replaying his distracted smile, the way his shoulders stiffened when I asked. Something was off, and I knew myself well enough to trust that gnawing instinct. That afternoon, I met Marina for coffee, needing to let the unease spill out of me. As soon as I mentioned Eric's new private lessons, her eyebrows shot up. "He's always smiling at his phone before leaving," I confessed, stirring my cup like it held answers. "And now he's out the door earlier, practically dressed like he's going to a date, not a tutoring session." Marina leaned closer, her voice low but sharp. "Then find out who the student really is. Tutors don't go cologne ready." Her words echoed in my mind long after we parted ways. Marina had always been blunt, and this time, her suspicion only fed my own. I tried to reason with myself. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe this was just work. But deep down, I knew. Eric's laughter at his phone, the way he brushed off my questions, it didn't fit the story of a man simply helping a student with schoolwork. It fit something else entirely, something he didn't want me to see. By the time I got home, I was resolved. I wouldn't confront him, not yet. That would only push him into lying better. Instead, I'd observe, quietly, carefully, without tipping my hand. If there was something to uncover, I'd find it. And if there wasn't, at least I'd know the truth lived with me, not in the shadows of his excuses. The next few days, I paid closer attention. Every detail mattered. The way he hummed while checking his phone, the sudden care he put into ironing his shirts, even the extra spray of cologne before stepping out. He thought he was moving in silence, but I was listening to every note. My instincts were on high alert, and though I smiled, cooked dinner, and asked about his day, inside I was cataloging every inconsistency. At night, lying beside him, I studied his face in the glow of his phone screen. He'd tilt it slightly away, pretending I wouldn't notice, his fingers tapping quick replies that never made a sound. I kept my breathing steady, pretending to drift into sleep, but my mind was racing. Each unanswered question piled up in my chest, pressing harder than the mattress beneath me. Something was unraveling, and I needed to know where the threads would lead. I told myself not to jump to conclusions, not to let jealousy dictate my thoughts. But the truth is, women like me, we know. We sense when the air changes, when the rhythm of a relationship falters. And now mine had. So I waited, watching him leave once more with that rehearsed smile and a hint of cologne trailing behind, knowing that my quiet suspicion was only the beginning of something bigger. One evening, Eric came home later than usual, his tie loose, his expression guarded. I tried to keep my tone soft, almost casual, as I asked, "How did the class go? Did she understand the material?" He froze for a split second, then tossed his jacket over a chair. "Don't interrogate me, Jessica." "I'm tired," he snapped. The word interrogate stung. I wasn't grilling him, I was asking a wife's question. But the sharpness in his voice told me more than his words ever could. I bit my tongue, choosing silence over an argument, but inside I was seething. If there truly was a student, why did every question feel like a trap he needed to escape? Why did his answers sound like rehearsed lines instead of honest conversation? The room felt smaller as he moved past me, already reaching for his phone, his body there, but his mind elsewhere. And in that moment, I knew. This wasn't just about lessons anymore. Something was cracking open, and he couldn't patch it with excuses. Later that week, fate handed me confirmation in the most unexpected way. Mrs. Alvarez, our chatty neighbor, stopped me in the hallway with her usual bright smile. "I saw Eric earlier with a pretty brunette in a red coat," she said, laughing. "Didn't know you cut your hair." I forced a laugh of my own, my heart plunging so fast it almost knocked the air from my lungs. I thanked her quickly, pretending not to care, but inside, her words cut like glass. Walking back into my apartment after that hallway chat with Mrs. Alvarez, I felt my legs trembling. I leaned against the door, holding onto the knob as if it could keep me steady. A brunette in a red coat. Her laugh had been so innocent, but to me, it was a dagger dressed as a smile. I replayed every detail, Eric's clipped tone, his late nights, the way he smelled of cologne long after he claimed to be tutoring. Suddenly, it all wove together into something I could no longer ignore. At dinner that night, I watched him closely. He talked about traffic, about a project at work, anything but the so-called lessons. His plate remained half full while his phone sat face down beside him, buzzing now and then with messages he refused to check in front of me. I nodded, smiled, and asked the right questions, but inside my mind was racing. Each answer he gave only deepened the silence in my chest. My husband, the man who once shared everything with me, now felt like a stranger rehearsing a role. That night, while he showered, I walked through the living room and noticed again. No books, no papers, nothing resembling tutoring material. His bag was empty, except for his cologne and a change of shirt. The evidence wasn't loud, but it was there, whispering at me, tugging at my intuition. And I realized I didn't need him to confess. I needed to see for myself. That thought rooted itself in my mind like a vow I couldn't turn away from. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. Asking him again would only drive him deeper into his lies. Every question was met with annoyance, every doubt dismissed as me being paranoid. But I wasn't paranoid. I was connecting dots he thought I couldn't see. So I made a decision that night. I wouldn't waste another word. I would gather proof, quietly, carefully, without him sensing a thing. Lying beside him in bed, I stared at the ceiling, listening to his steady breathing. My mind was anything but still. I thought about the way his hand used to reach for mine under the covers, how he once whispered plans for our future in the dark. Now, all I could hear was distance. All I could feel was the chill of betrayal creeping in. My heart ached, but my resolve was stronger. If he was going to dismantle the life we built, I'd be the one to uncover it piece by piece. I rolled onto my side, watching him from the glow of his phone on the nightstand. Tomorrow, I told myself. Tomorrow I'd start. I wouldn't shout, I wouldn't cry, I wouldn't beg for the truth. I'd trace his lies to their source, and when I found it, I'd be ready. What he didn't know was that his private lessons had just become my private investigation. The first clue came from his car. One morning while he showered, I slipped outside with his keys, my heart pounding so hard I swore the neighbors could hear it. Sliding into the driver's seat, I scanned quickly. Nothing on the dashboard, nothing in the glove box. But then, under the passenger seat, a glint caught my eye. An earring. Small, silver, delicate. Definitely not mine. I held it in my palm, my fingers trembling, as if the metal itself burned with betrayal. I slipped it into my pocket, careful to leave everything else untouched. When he left later, whistling as though life were picture perfect, I pressed a smile onto my face. Inside, though, I felt the sting of confirmation. It wasn't just suspicion anymore. Now I had something tangible, something I couldn't explain away, no matter how hard I wanted to. And it made me realize how far he'd already gone, how deep the lies ran between us. That afternoon, I packed his thermos for work like I always did, but when he returned it the next day, rinsed but not spotless, I saw it, a faint lipstick mark, a shade I never wore. My stomach lurched. There was no mistake this time, no room for doubt. It wasn't tutoring, it wasn't mentoring. This was something intimate, and he was carrying pieces of her back into my home. The lipstick mark haunted me all day. Every time I glanced at the thermos, it was like a scarlet signature mocking my silence. I couldn't tell Eric, not yet. I needed more than hints, more than whispers of evidence. I needed certainty. So I turned to the one thing he'd forgotten we shared: technology. We still had a device linked under the same account, and while he believed I never touched it, I knew how to use it to see where he really was. That evening, when he said he'd be at the library helping Camilla, I opened the tracking app with shaky hands. The little blue dot didn't sit near a library. It pulsed inside a condo complex across town. My heart hammered in my ears as I stared at the screen, the truth blinking at me in real time. The walls of our home suddenly felt smaller, colder, like I was trapped in a story I never agreed to live. I grabbed my phone and called Marina, my voice trembling but firm. "He said he was at the library," I told her, staring at the map. "But his phone is at a condo complex." There was a pause, and then Marina's voice cut through, sharp and steady. "Then go see who's getting the lesson." Her words weren't a suggestion, they were a challenge, and I knew she was right. That night, I drove across town with my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly they ached. Each stoplight felt like a test of courage, daring me to keep going, to face what I already knew deep down. When I pulled up near the condo complex, I parked far enough away to blend into the shadows. My heart was racing, but my eyes were steady, fixed on the building like it was holding my entire future hostage. Minutes felt like hours until I finally saw him. Eric's familiar stride, his easy smile, the one I used to believe was mine alone. But he wasn't walking toward a library or carrying books. He was walking straight into Camilla's building. And then I saw her. Young, polished, radiant in a way that made my stomach twist. She greeted him at the door, and the way they leaned in toward each other told me everything words never could. I sat there in silence, gripping the steering wheel, the world tilting around me. It wasn't just suspicion anymore. It was reality, sharp and undeniable. My chest burned with betrayal, but beneath the hurt something colder stirred: resolve. Watching them disappear inside, I made myself a promise. If he thought I'd remain silent, he was about to learn I'd been listening, observing, and preparing for a lesson of my own. I sat in my car that evening, the engine off, the night air pressing heavy against the windows. From where I was parked, I had a clear view of the entrance to Camilla's building. And then, like a cruel play unfolding before me, I saw them. Eric leaned in, kissed her softly, and she laughed as if my marriage was the punchline. My stomach dropped, but my face remained still, my hands gripping my phone with icy determination. I raised it and captured the moment. Click, click, his betrayal frozen in time. Hours later, I sat on the couch at home, pretending to scroll mindlessly through recipes while Eric showered. Our synced tablet rested on the coffee table, lighting up with every message he sent her. I screen recorded everything: the late-night flirty texts, the photos, the promises. Each word cut into me, but I gathered them like ammunition, a silent warrior building her case. If he thought I was blind, he had no idea how sharp my eyes had become. When he finally walked into the living room, hair damp, wearing his favorite lounge shirt, he stretched and smiled as if the world were intact. "Lesson was intense," he said casually, dropping onto the couch. "She needs extra help next week." I met his eyes, calm, composed, almost tender. "Of course," I replied, my voice steady. "She must be very committed." He chuckled, completely unaware of the storm gathering behind my calm smile. That night, I lay beside him, listening to his steady breathing as if it were proof of innocence. But on the nightstand, his phone buzzed, lighting up with her name. Camilla. My chest tightened, but I didn't move. Instead, I let the glow illuminate his face while he shifted slightly, pretending to be asleep. I watched his hand slip to the phone, fingers tapping quickly under the blanket. He thought he was clever. He thought I was asleep. But I memorized every detail. The following morning, I played the role of the dutiful wife with flawless precision. Coffee poured, toast buttered, a quick kiss on his cheek. Inside, though, I was sharpening my resolve. I wasn't the woman who begged for honesty anymore. I was the woman who collected evidence. Every laugh he shared with her, every lie he fed me, it was all fuel. I smiled as he walked out the door, but behind that smile was steel. I understood then that the power wasn't in confronting him too soon. The power was in silence, in patience, in letting him bury himself deeper. He was performing for me, convinced he still held control. What he didn't realize was that I'd stopped being his audience. I was now the director, rewriting the script he thought he owned. And soon, the curtain would rise on a scene he'd never forget. I carried on with my days as though nothing had changed, yet everything had. At dinner with friends, I laughed at the right moments, poured wine, and nodded at stories, all while the weight of my secret hummed beneath the surface. Nobody could tell I had an arsenal of proof hidden in my phone. That dual life, smiling on the outside, plotting on the inside, became my shield. And strangely, it gave me strength. Watching Eric strut around our home, so sure of himself, made my silence feel like victory. He thought he was clever, slipping away under the guise of lessons, believing I was too naive to question. But I had the photos, the synced messages, the lipstick mark, the earring. Piece by piece, the puzzle was complete. And every time he looked me in the eyes and lied, I held my calm, knowing I had already won. At night, while he slept peacefully beside me, I rehearsed my own lines in my head. I pictured the day he'd sit across from me, the mask ripped away, his excuses worthless in the face of truth. I knew it wasn't enough just to catch him. I needed to make him feel the weight of what he had done. And in that darkness, with the glow of his phone still blinking on the nightstand, I began crafting the downfall he'd never see coming. By then, I wasn't just gathering evidence. I was preparing for the performance of my life. I wanted his lies to unravel not in whispers, but in front of an audience. So I staged the perfect scene. I told Eric that Camilla should come by for a study review at our house, pretending it was my idea to support his tutoring. He bought it easily, flashing me that practiced smile, never realizing I was pulling the strings. I invited Marina and two of my closest friends under the guise of a casual dinner. They thought it would be just wine, laughter, and good company. What they didn't know was that they'd be front-row witnesses to Eric's unmasking. I spent hours setting the table, not just with plates and candles, but with carefully prepared ammunition, printed conversations, screenshots, photos. Each page neatly stacked, waiting to be laid out like evidence in a trial. When Marina arrived early, I let her in on the secret. Her eyes widened, and she squeezed my hand with a mix of pride and disbelief. "I want them both there," I whispered, my voice low but steady. "I want them silent when I speak." Marina tilted her head, studying me for a moment before nodding. "And after that?" she asked. I smiled, the kind of smile that comes when you've already seen the ending. "After that, he can teach her full-time, without me paying any bills." The night before the dinner, I barely slept. Instead, I rehearsed the sequence in my mind. How I'd greet them, when I'd drop the first piece of proof, how I'd keep my composure while his mask crumbled. I wanted precision, not chaos. He had turned my life into a cruel performance, but I would own the final act. Every detail mattered, from the wine glasses polished to a shine, to the stack of printed messages waiting like a deck of loaded cards. As I set the table the next day, I felt something shift inside me. For weeks, I'd been living in the shadows of suspicion, carrying the weight of secrets I never asked for. But now, laying out the silverware, I felt lighter, stronger. My hands didn't shake as they once had. They moved with purpose. Even the candles flickering on the table seemed to burn in solidarity, waiting to witness what was about to unfold. By the time the first guests arrived, the stage was ready. Marina gave me a knowing look, one that said she trusted me to see this through. I smiled, greeting everyone warmly, pouring drinks, laughing as though nothing were unusual. Yet beneath the small talk, my heart beat in rhythm with the plan. I wasn't just a wife anymore. I was the architect of Eric's downfall, and soon enough, both he and Camilla would realize they'd walked right into my trap. As the evening drew closer, I felt no fear, only focus. Eric thought it would be just another dinner, and Camilla likely believed she was stepping into some harmless gathering. Neither of them suspected that the walls were closing in. When I glanced at the neatly stacked folder of evidence on the sideboard, I felt an odd calm. My revenge wasn't about shouting or tears, it was about truth, delivered in the sharpest, cleanest way possible. While laughter floated around the living room, I busied myself with final touches in the dining area, pretending to fuss over wine choices. In reality, I was listening for the sound of his car, my heart quickening with anticipation. I imagined his face when he walked in with her, confident and smug, only to find himself surrounded by witnesses. For once, the performance wouldn't be his to control. The spotlight was mine. I caught Marina's eye across the room, and she gave me the slightest nod. That nod was enough. It reminded me I wasn't alone in this, that my strength had an echo in the women who stood with me. And as the doorbell finally rang, I wiped my hands on a linen napkin, lifted my chin, and prepared to welcome not just my husband and his student, but the truth that would finally shatter their illusion. When the door opened, there he was. Eric, standing tall with that smug half-smile, and right beside him, Camilla in her carefully chosen red dress. For a heartbeat, the room fell silent, the tension hanging so heavy it could be sliced with a knife. "I thought this was private," Eric muttered, his eyes darting nervously at the women seated around my table. I smiled, calm and deliberate, and gestured toward the chairs. "Oh, it is. Just not the way you imagined." They exchanged a quick glance, both uneasy now. I poured wine for my guests, each movement slow and measured, letting the silence do the work. Then, without a word, I placed the folder of printed photos and messages in the center of the table. The sound of paper hitting wood cut through the quiet like thunder. Camilla's face drained of color as she recognized the screenshots. Eric's jaw tightened, his hand twitching at his side, but he didn't reach for them. He didn't need to. The evidence spoke louder than either of them ever could. I looked straight at Camilla, my voice smooth, steady, carrying the weight of weeks of silence. "You didn't book private lessons," I said, each word clear and sharp. "You booked the last day of his freedom?" Her lips parted, searching for a response, but nothing came out. Eric shifted in his seat, but I kept my eyes on her, because in that moment, the two of them were no longer a secret. They were a spectacle. And I was the one who wrote the ending. Eric finally reached for the papers, flipping through the photos and screenshots with shaking hands. His face drained of its usual confidence, every page stripping away another layer of the man I thought I knew. He opened his mouth to speak, but I raised my hand, silencing him before a single excuse could fall from his lips. "Don't bother," I said softly, but the steel in my voice filled the room. "You lied in my face, in my home, and you thought I'd never see it. I saw everything." Camilla shifted in her seat, her eyes darting toward the door, as if escape could erase what was already written. My friends sat in stunned silence, their glasses of wine untouched, their gazes fixed on the collapse unfolding before them. Marina, though, gave me the smallest smile, supportive, fierce, proud. I felt her strength weaving with mine, reminding me that I wasn't breaking here. I was rising. Then I dropped the final blow, my voice calm and steady. "I've already met with a lawyer. The accounts are in my name. The house, too. The assets? Moved. By the time you finish this glass of wine, Eric, you'll realize you've lost more than a wife. You've lost every comfort you thought was yours." The words sank into the silence like stones, leaving him pale, speechless, and trapped. I turned to Camilla then, letting the weight of my words hang in the air before I spoke again. "Don't worry," I said, my tone almost gentle, though every syllable cut sharp. "Now you can both focus on your studies, starting with consequences." Her eyes widened and Eric's face flushed with a mix of rage and humiliation. For once, the two of them had no clever comebacks, no excuses polished enough to mask the truth. They sat frozen, their silence louder than any denial could have been. I leaned back in my chair, savoring the stillness that followed. For weeks I had carried the burden of suspicion, the ache of betrayal pressing against my chest. But now, watching Eric squirm and Camilla shrink into herself, I felt something else entirely. Release. The weight was gone, lifted clean from my shoulders, replaced by a calm I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't broken. I wasn't defeated. I was free. The dinner continued, though not as Eric had imagined. Laughter filled the room, but it wasn't his anymore. It belonged to me and the women who stood witness to my strength. When I finally excused myself from the table, I didn't look back. Because this wasn't the end of a marriage, it was the beginning of my freedom. And that, I decided, was the final lesson Eric would never forget.